Nazi Germany existed for only 12 years, from 1933 to 1945, yet it reshaped the 20th century through dictatorship, world war, genocide, and destruction on a continental scale. Officially, the state was first called the German Reich and later the Greater German Reich. Its leaders and propagandists called it the Third Reich, claiming it was the successor to earlier German empires, the Holy Roman Empire and the German Empire founded in 1871. The phrase also served a political purpose. It suggested destiny, permanence, and national rebirth. Nazi propaganda even spoke of a 1,000-year Reich. In reality, it collapsed in May 1945 after Allied armies entered Berlin and Germany surrendered. Understanding Nazi Germany means understanding how a modern state, with laws, ministries, schools, courts, police, industry, and armies, was transformed into an instrument of totalitarian rule. The Nazi dictatorship began after Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany in January 1933. He did not come to power through a single dramatic takeover, but through a political crisis in which conservative elites believed they could control him. They were wrong. Once inside government, Hitler and the Nazi Party moved quickly to destroy democratic institutions and eliminate opposition. Political rivals were intimidated, arrested, or forced into silence. The Nazi regime used emergency powers, propaganda, street violence, and legal manipulation to convert a fragile democracy into a one-party state. By 1934, after the death of President Paul von Hindenburg, Hitler combined the powers of president and chancellor. A referendum confirmed him as Führer, or leader. From that point, loyalty to the state increasingly meant loyalty to Hitler personally. Nazi Germany was totalitarian, but it was not always orderly. Power was centralized around Hitler, whose word was treated as the highest law, yet the government beneath him was often chaotic. Ministries, party offices, police agencies, military leaders, and regional officials competed for influence. Rather than a smooth machine, the regime operated as a collection of rival factions trying to interpret Hitler's wishes and gain power by acting more radically than their competitors. This style of rule encouraged escalation. Officials did not always need written orders, they learned to anticipate what the regime wanted. The result was a state where normal legal boundaries dissolved, responsibility was blurred, and increasingly extreme policies could be carried out through overlapping institutions that rewarded cruelty, obedience, and ideological zeal. The Nazis gained public support partly by promising recovery from the Great Depression. Germany had suffered mass unemployment, poverty, and political instability during the early 1930s. The regime responded with large public works projects, including the Autobahnen, and massive government spending. A major part of this recovery was tied to rearmament. Germany secretly and then openly rebuilt its armed forces, the Wehrmacht, in defiance of post-World War I restrictions. Much of this was financed by deficit spending, meaning the regime borrowed heavily and pushed the costs into the future. To many Germans, falling unemployment and visible construction seemed like national revival. But this economic recovery was deeply connected to militarization. The economy was being prepared not simply for prosperity, but for war. Propaganda was central to Nazi rule. The regime understood that dictatorship required more than fear, it also needed belief, conformity, and emotional mobilization. The propaganda ministry controlled messages through films, newspapers, radio, posters, rallies, and public ceremonies. Mass rallies presented Hitler as the embodiment of the nation, creating a cult of personality around him. The regime promoted images of unity, discipline, strength, and racial destiny while hiding or justifying violence against enemies. Artistic expression was tightly controlled. Some art was celebrated as pure and heroic, while other styles were condemned, banned, or ridiculed. Schools also became instruments of ideology. Education emphasized racial theory, obedience, physical fitness, population policy, and preparation for military service. Young people were taught that loyalty to Hitler and the racial community mattered more than independent thought. At the core of Nazi ideology was racism. The regime claimed that Germanic peoples were part of a superior Aryan race and that history was a struggle between races for survival and space. This belief shaped law, education, policing, war, and mass murder. Antisemitism was especially central. Jews were falsely portrayed as a threat to Germany and to civilization itself. The regime also targeted Romani people, Slavs, disabled people, homosexuals, political opponents, Jehovah's Witnesses, Freemasons, and others labeled undesirable. Nazi eugenics treated human life as something the state could classify, improve, or eliminate. These ideas were not just slogans. They became policy. People were excluded from jobs, schools, citizenship, and public life, then imprisoned, deported, enslaved, or murdered as the regime's radical vision expanded. The Nazi state attacked political and social independence wherever it found it. Communists, socialists, liberals, trade unionists, and other opponents were suppressed early. Opposition leaders were imprisoned, and many citizens learned that criticism could bring surveillance, arrest, or worse. Christian churches were not abolished, but clergy and believers who resisted Nazi control faced pressure and punishment. Women were pushed toward roles defined by motherhood and service to the racial community, while educational and career opportunities were curtailed. The regime presented this as restoring traditional order, but the deeper purpose was control. Every institution, from schools to youth organizations to professional associations, was expected to serve Nazi goals. Public life narrowed until the boundary between state, party, and society was deliberately blurred. Hitler's foreign policy became increasingly aggressive during the late 1930s. He demanded revision of the post-World War I settlement and sought to expand German territory. In 1938, Germany annexed Austria in the Anschluss, presenting the move as national unification. Later that year, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia with a large German-speaking population. European leaders, hoping to avoid war, allowed the transfer through the Munich Agreement. But each success encouraged further expansion. Nazi Germany's diplomacy was built around pressure, threats, and opportunism. In August 1939, Germany signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, shocking much of the world. This agreement helped clear the way for Germany to invade Poland in September 1939, launching World War II in Europe. In the first phase of the war, Nazi Germany achieved rapid military victories. Poland was defeated, and in 1940 German forces conquered or dominated much of Western and Northern Europe, including France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway. Germany was allied with fascist Italy and other Axis powers, and for a time it appeared militarily unstoppable. But Britain did not surrender. The failure to subdue Britain meant Germany faced a continuing enemy in the West, protected by sea power and increasingly supported by the wider resources of the British Empire and, later, the United States. The early victories also disguised a dangerous reality. Germany had expanded quickly, but it now had to occupy, exploit, and police vast territories while preparing for even larger wars. In 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, turning the war into a campaign of extermination in Eastern Europe. This was not only a military operation. It was tied to plans for racial conquest, including General Plan Ost and the Hunger Plan. Nazi leaders imagined depopulating, enslaving, or starving vast numbers of people to make room for German settlement and control. Slavic populations were treated as inferior, and Jewish communities in the East faced systematic mass shootings and deportations. The war against the Soviet Union became one of the most brutal conflicts in history. It consumed immense manpower and resources and exposed the ideological nature of Nazi rule. Conquest, racial policy, forced labor, starvation, and murder were not separate from the war, they were built into it. The Holocaust was the culmination of Nazi racial policy. It was the systematic persecution and murder of 6 million Jews, along with the mass killing of other targeted groups, including Romani people, disabled people, and many others. The process moved through stages, exclusion, dispossession, forced segregation, deportation, forced labor, mass shootings, and industrialized killing in extermination camps. It required the participation of government offices, police forces, rail systems, camp guards, industrial firms, and collaborators across occupied Europe. The Holocaust was not an accident of war or a spontaneous outbreak of hatred. It was organized by a modern state committed to a genocidal ideology. Its history shows how bureaucracy, propaganda, dehumanization, and violence can combine to make mass murder possible. By 1943, Nazi Germany had lost the strategic initiative. The Soviet Union recovered and pushed German forces back after devastating battles in the East. The United States entered the war after 1941, bringing enormous industrial and military power to the Allied side. Allied bombing of German cities and infrastructure intensified, while Axis partners were driven back in southern and eastern Europe. By late 1944, Germany had been pushed toward its 1939 borders. Yet Hitler refused to accept defeat. His insistence on fighting to the end caused further destruction, more deaths, and the collapse of German infrastructure. As Soviet forces advanced from the east and Western Allied forces advanced from the west, the regime's promises of glory gave way to ruins, refugees, and desperation. Nazi Germany ended in May 1945. Allied armies captured Berlin, Hitler died by suicide, and Germany capitulated, ending World War II in Europe. The aftermath brought occupation, division, and a reckoning with the crimes of the regime. The Allies began denazification, attempting to remove Nazi influence from public life, institutions, education, and government. Surviving Nazi leaders were tried at Nuremberg for war crimes, crimes against peace, and crimes against humanity. These trials did not punish every perpetrator, but they established an important principle: state officials and military leaders could be held personally responsible for criminal policies. The history of Nazi Germany remains a warning about dictatorship, propaganda, racism, militarism, and the speed with which democratic institutions can be destroyed when power is surrendered to extremism. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.